today's agenda is that we are going to go through ToyNet design, design meaning technology, software design, as well as technology as a user experience design. And then we'll have Scott talk about what the software team has been up to and have some of our interns speak. And then Theo will talk about infrastructure with me, and then we will have a demo at the end so you can learn something. Okay, so ToyNet proof of concept. In the earlier track, we talked about the why ToyNet is important from a vision perspective, from a helping veterans in prison perspective, but there's a lot of this story which I didn't say there about myself. So I've wanted to become a site reliability engineer for a very long time. I've been told by various managers that this may be a good direction for me. However, I didn't really know how to get started. There's no boot camps on how to become a site reliability engineer. It's some mix of networking, infrastructure, and then just engineering thinking. So I was studying networks on my own, but one challenge that I had is I'm a visual learner. So a lot of the textbooks designed for networks look like Greek to me. And so I would spend hours and hours, hundreds of hours, sketching out the network protocols to understand them better. And I thought, hey, maybe this could be used by others. And hey, if I could automate these, that would be even cooler. So that's where the ToyNet library happened. I was basically laid off, and I wanted to not study algorithms doing lead code. I wanted to study algorithms by making algorithms that actually help me in my day job. So I decided to make a Python library that allows me to ingest an XML, which has some configuration of routers, switches, and hosts, and you can also define links between them. That is ingested by the library, it's parsed, and that is turned into an internal class structure. And I do this because it's very hard for me to visualize linear information, even though that is what a lot of networking looks like. So having a class structure with APIs was really helpful for me. I would ingest that class structure that's generated into a library that is usually used for cloud architecture diagrams, and we'll dig into this a little more later. And that would generate an image of the network that I was describing on the left. Another thing that I did was to emulate the network so you can actually have these hosts communicate with each other. And for that, I used a library called Mininet. And we'll see more about that later. If you're interested in seeing my proof of concept, though it's not as cool as what we have now, you can go to my GitHub. Takako Nishimura is my real name, /project-reclass. I'll take a note to send that out later. Alrighty. Any questions so far? Feel very free. We'll dive further into all of this later, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Yeah, you've basically effectively created a network architecting tool here.
Yes, like you can pick devices and you can connect them. It's far from complete in terms of if you were to then deploy this, like we don't know what kind of switches we're talking about, what kind of routers. It is more conceptual, but it is the first step of network architecting to visualize the topology so you know really what you're configuring and what interfaces to stick them into. All right. Any other questions?
And you're sure you're not going to sell it to people?
Well, I could spin up another company for that, maybe a for-profit business.
Okay.
And maybe they will share some code. Alrighty, so diagrams. This is so this person named Min. He is a programmer. He made this library called Diagrams. And what it does is he had a DSL, which you can see an example of on the left, which generates the image on the right. So code is generating an image. So the yellow box is signifying what is being translated into an image. So in this case, they made a diagram, which has the title event processing, which you can see at the bottom. And then each of these nodes, like this Kubernetes node, you just define them. And you can also connect them through these arrows, and they will actually connect in the image. So I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. It looks sort of like what I want to do, um, except instead of cloud architecture nodes, it would be devices, and instead of data flow, it's wires. So I took this syntax and I extended the classes to be network, subnet, switch, host, router, and I named them. And I was like, can this generate the image I want if I hack the PNGs? And indeed, it did, which was very surprising to me in the moment. I didn't expect it to work, but when it did, it got me thinking. Blaze introduced me to MiniNet, which is uh, it can emulate enterprise networks all in a single host. So you can pretend to have this computer, you can pretend to connect this with this switch, and it can't do computation, right? Because your computer is only one computer big. However, you can simulate the communication between them. It was invented at Stanford to do a lot of network research. And what it can do is it can create a client where you can ping a host from another host. So the first part of this first line, H2, ping H3. H2 is the host that you are behaving as, and then ping 3 is the command. Usually in real life, you're going to have to write out the whole IP address of H3, but they abstract that away from you so that you can do more logical thinking and less looking at numbers. At the bottom, I believe they are simulating a client-server situation between two different hosts. What you can also do is not just go through the client, but you can use their API to create topologies, and you can actually create classes that you can save that say things like tree topo. So a tree topology will always have some depth to it, and a number for the fan out of how many nodes come out of that depth. And this is super exciting because you would have to define all of this manually otherwise. And so I reuse this library, the image that you saw earlier of the one router, I think 2 switches and a couple of hosts. You can show it here through MiniNet. It takes a lot more detail than the diagrams does because it's actually emulating a network. So you're gonna need to explain this is the IP address for this host. This is the default route for packets when they need to go outside of the network. But the link part is still pretty basic. Great, so I had these ingredients that helped me to ideate ToyNet. So this was the most basic wireframe. Purple used to be our logo color, and then one day it turned teal. So that's why this is purple. It's super rudimentary, but what I want you to focus on is the console, which is how we are simulating the commands that you saw here. So here I've selected H4 as the host that I want to communicate as, and I had decided to run the ARP command on this IP address, 172.16.0.100. And so what the ARP command does is it's the address resolution protocol. It's a layer 2 protocol within the OSI model. And it's trying to convert this IP address into what we call a MAC address so that it can know where to send the packet. It says no entry, which was weird because I had a host in there with this IP address. I'm like, they're connected, what's wrong? So I tried pinging it, which is to communicate with that machine. And the ICMP packets were coming back. So I was like, oh, weird. It should be working. Why isn't it working? Why doesn't the ARP table have this information? So I ran it again, and it turns out it now did have the information. And that's because the ARP table is populated when a host communicates with another host for the first time, meaning that the first time I bring up the network, this information isn't available. There's a series of examples like this where just testing my code, I was able to learn more about networks, and it helped me to refine my understanding. Are there any questions so far? Give it a few more seconds. Feel free to jump in anytime. And with that, I will turn it to Cecil. Cecil, you can just ask me to click forward to talk about the user experience side of this whole project.
Awesome. Thank you, Tay. So I'm Cecil. I've been had been working as an architect for several years up until last April when I was, this last April when I was laid off. And so I decided to then shift my focus from designing physical spaces to digital ones. And I've been working as a UX designer with Project Reclass for the last 3 months, and it's been an awesome experience. And so today I'll just talk quickly about the design process and the progress we've made on the design side. So, go back. Thank you. Yes, in a perfect world, the UX design process typically looks something like this, where you start with empathy, the definition, ideation, prototyping, testing, and iterating. But if anyone has worked on a product before or a design process, it rarely follows a linear path. But we did our best to kind of stick to this. Next one. So starting with the empathizing portion, Tay had actually done a lot of this legwork before I joined the organization, really understanding the personas, taking their feedback from their lessons in person, and really defining accessibility requirements and features. She kind of did before I arrived. And so I basically took that information and kind of folded it into my own process. Next slide. The definition phase really came with kind of analyzing similar products, looking at features that already existed and how we could apply those features in our product. And then also having a brief conversation with Tay about what our aesthetic might be and taking current UX trends and kind of applying that to the design. We really kind of landed on this dark mode aesthetic as well as something that kind of mimics code terminals. And then lastly was compiling guidelines, which is really starting to kind of flush out our assets, things like grid layouts, color theory, and typography. Next slide. After that, to begin the ideation phase, we really kind of sat down and prioritized specific features and what we wanted to accomplish over the summer. And that really came in kind of 3 different pieces, which were the emulator, which is the most complex piece, a splash screen. I can kind of tell you a little bit about what ToyNet does, what it's for, and a way to kind of experience a demo, and then the curriculum page, which is more of a Q4 project, but I kind of designed all of these in tandem. So first was the emulator. Definitely the most robust feature, including kind of navigation, this configure tab, info panel, and image panel. And really with this portion of the product, we were aiming to kind of mimic the process of computer networking in real life and see how we could, translate those interactions in the emulator. Another challenge that kind of came up was making sure that the experience would be the same whether we're hosting this software locally on a laptop or if it's being utilized through a web service. And so those are things that we'll be tackling kind of as we move forward, and also incorporating more interaction feedback, things like error messages, and also building out the console and history tab features. So these images to the left are just, or right, sorry, are a few kind of iterations that we worked through as far as like color, information architecture, things like that. Next slide. Yeah, so this is kind of where the mockup stands today. And so basically, really fleshing out how our users are going to be actually making connections between routers, hosts, and switches, and how the image panel kind of gives feedback once that connection is made. And then also kind of fleshing out navigation between the different pages. Next slide. Next was the splash screen. Within that, it was the home, about, and kind of a link call to action to the demo. And so when designing the splash screen, I really thought of it as the first impression. There should be kind of an attention grabber and then a clear call to action. And so I decided to kind of come up with these custom illustrations to really tie everything together and also kind of tell a little bit about ToyNet visually with some symbolism. Next slide. And this is kind of where we ended up with the mock-up of the splash screen. I'm really trying to tie back the colors with some of the colors we used in the emulator, as well as tying back to our logo. Next slide. Lastly was the curriculum page. This is still under construction. As I said before, this is more of a Q4 project, but I did design the interface to kind of match the emulator and splash screen, as well as mapping out kind of the user journey and making sure that you could flow intuitively from splash screen to curriculum to the emulator. Next slide. And so this is currently where that stands visually. A lot of what you see here is an exploration of feedback for the users on their progress with the curriculum, and ways to kind of let you know what you've completed, what's next, and all that. Next slide. And then lastly, in the prototyping phase was design handoff, which is something that I had little experience with prior to this. And so I learned a lot from the engineering team. They really became kind of co-designers in this process, where I built out this design system with specs and assets, and then specifying interactions, doing my best to kind of clearly and more concisely convey what each interaction would be and how that translates in code. At this point, I also worked with our UX writer and content strategist to kind of hash out the microcopy to make sure that the language used is also clear and concise. Next slide. And this was the testing phase, which was one of my favorites this far. I worked to build out kind of a testing plan, which is basically, a moderated study conducted via Zoom, so that I could see participants kind of walking through a few tasks that I had for them and seeing if our decisions were as intuitive as we kind of expected them to be. And so moving forward, if anyone on the call now is interested in being a user tester, over the next few weeks, we'll be conducting as many tests as possible on the demo that we have currently. And next slide, please.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Which will tie into the iteration phase. Once we've conducted enough testing, I'll be taking that feedback and putting that into kind of actionable steps to basically make a version 2 and repeat this entire process to make it more user-friendly. And I guess that's all for me, but are there any questions from you guys?
Any at all?
Yeah, I was curious about what program software do you guys use to kind of develop your prototype?
Yeah, so I've been working primarily in Adobe XD. I use a lot of Adobe Suite products, and so it was very easy for me to kind of take SVGs and illustrations directly from those programs and drop them into Adobe XD. And then I'll also be working next quarter to kind of build out some more complex interactions, and you can do that very easily in Adobe XD. So that's primarily what I've been using.
Mm-hmm. And I think you briefly mentioned this in the first slide, but I just want to clarify, like, who are our main target users when we develop this product?
So this quarter really focused on the incarcerated veterans as our main kind of user, and then also any instructors that might be utilizing the program as kind of a teaching tool. So really those are the two target users for this quarter. But at the end of the day, we really want it to be intuitive to anyone. If you don't have a computer networks background or are just kind of picking this up as a hobby, it should be kind of accessible to pretty much everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? And Cecil, I am seeing as you were jumping through the cycle, how many times you bounced back and forth. I just wanted to thank you for jumping on the team after we were already starting to code and whipping out the first few features for us. And then you also mentioned like, hey, I think I can make a better design by taking a step back and looking at the whole system first so that I don't regret the decisions I'm making now. And we are so happy with the results. So thank you so much for being a team player, but also knowing what's really important to this product.
Yeah, no problem.
Not a question, but just a quick comment. I got to say, just by looking through this, it honestly looks absolutely amazing. I'm actually even more excited than ever to actually use it. So it looks really good.
Awesome. Thank you.
In class. Okay, and now we are moving to the software team to talk about what features were built out this summer. I'll turn it over to Scott.
Yeah, so during the summer, we really focused on mainly the splash screen and the emulator. And what you're kind of seeing on the screen right now is the emulator. And there are a couple different parts that went into it. And one of the major parts that I actually got to work on this summer was the configure tab. And that's where you can see people dragging and dropping the different devices and connecting each other, as you also saw in the demo. Um, that was a neat task because of we needed to figure out a way to make it intuitive for people to connect and create different devices. And we really settled on that drag and drop feature with some feedback from Cecil and just some different feedback. And I guess that brings it to Yi, who was one of our interns this summer, to talk about the image panel and the splash screen that he worked on this summer. Go ahead, Yi.
Hi, my name is Yi. I was an intern for Reclass during the summer, and I found Reclass while looking for a place to challenge myself and improve my skills as a developer. Unfortunately, I'm not able to turn my camera on because of some connectivity issues, but back to the features. So when we were designing the emulator, one of the things we wanted was for the tool to be useful for all types of learners, such as people who learn better visually. That's why we decided to implement the image panel feature, which allowed interactivity between the user and the network configuration they set up. So basically, someone would change configurations on the configure tab, and then the image will update with a new PNG of what you had in the configure tab. The image panel currently is a draggable interface, and it has options to zoom, center, and hide for those that want to like mentally visualize it and challenge themselves more. Next slide. Another feature we thought would be useful was to be able to track your progress as you work. We thought that this would allow the user to have a goal to work towards and would then motivate them to continue the course. So we create a splash screen. So how it works is users will log in through the splash screen and then get access to the rest of the course and the progress. And it also serves as a brief overview of what ToyNet provides and which is really important to beginners and those who are like interested and not sure if they want to try or just on the edge. And with that, I'll give it back to Tay.
Alrighty. So yes, as you all have noticed, the curriculum screen isn't being demoed today, and that's because it's not done. That is one of the first things that we want to get done in Q4, especially on the React side. But also, we could use some more Python developers to build out that team. So if you're interested in getting involved, that's probably what you'll be working on first. I wanted to mention what that data structure looks like. So here we have a network plus curriculum. So curriculum is an object, and then the curriculum object may have multiple modules in it. And each of these modules, you can see here, we have the motivation lesson, and then we have covering layer 1, 2, and 3 of the OSI model. Within each module, you can have any number of configurable submodules. And I wanted to share what those submodules might look like. This isn't built out yet, but the lesson module at the simplest level would be a series of images which represent the curriculum. So right now what I have in the Django repository is a series of images which are screenshots of the presentations that we delivered within the prison, but it might become more robust in the future. Then you would have to practice the things you learned from the curriculum in an emulator, which is what we've been demoing. We also want to have a relevant article section because not everyone learns the same. I learned through images. Some people learn through reading real world incidents of network outages and such. We want to make those accessible to our users because they don't have access to internet and can't look these things up themselves. Finally, we have quizzes, which will help you with skills test. If you're not happy with your grade, you can try the lesson again. This also informs us of whether we're doing a good job teaching the material or not. So if you take a step back, this is sort of what the overall feature system looks like. On the React side, we have built out the splash screen in the emulator, but we still have a couple more features to go. These are the ones that we haven't finished. So we have a Django backend for the network emulation, but we don't have a backend or front end for the rest. And that is what we're going to work on next. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can we go back to the image panel that you showed?
Yeah.
Is the image contained within the panel in SVG?
The image is contained within the image panel.
In a PNG format, correct?
Yeah.
However, the individual elements in there are SVGs, which are printed into PNG. So if it was that it's more zoomed in or something, it would render well. The zoom in and out would may become pixelated if you go too far. Does that answer your question, Nam?
Yeah, I wanted to extend that by saying if it was rendered as SVG objects, could the icons there be interactive?
Very good question. You see the team smiling because everybody asked that. I don't know, Cecil, you want to mention a little bit on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a long-term goal. I mean, obviously, if you could, be able to take those elements and like physically drag connections, it's more of a, it's closer to what you would actually do in real life. And so I think for future iterations, we are definitely looking to design something that's a little more accurate to that real life interaction. But it's a very complex problem. So I think we're starting small and working our way up to that.
Yeah, Nam, we are trying to create something that people can look at because we know that will recruit more people to get involved. For my last job, I'm starting a new job now, but for my last job, I was working with architectural floor plans where you could drag and drop furniture, rooms, and then render them 3D. And it is very fun to have a canvas and have users directly feel that they're putting elements onto a screen. That is definitely a passion project that I think Cecil and I and many people on the software team share. And we'd probably get started on that sort of functionality Q1, maybe middle of Q1, hopefully early Q1 if we can get all the other apps going. Does that answer your question?
I have one more.
Absolutely.
So you've built the ToyNet emulator. Have you done a profiling on the computing power used for that?
I don't think we have. Scott, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure thing. So we actually haven't done any sort of like profiling on the React app on the front end just yet, mainly because we haven't seen or noticed any performance issues. That'll definitely be something that we work on in the future and looking for any way to optimize, but only once we start seeing some different bottlenecks that we are, because we are trying to, get things done, and we are trying to prioritize our tasks. So that is definitely something we'll be doing in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go live with users, we'd want to do that at least once and see where we stand. Any other questions?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Keep asking away. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what frameworks we use this summer and why.
Yeah, so one of the things with ToyNet is we wanted it to be a web client, and we decided to go with the React library, mainly because it is component-based. It allows us to have easy global and local state management. With React 16.8, I believe it introduced hooks and also the context API. So right now we're not even using something like MobX or Redux to manage global state management. It also just makes making the intuitive UIs fairly seamless, fairly easy, because it is so reactive. Next slide. And so along with that, whenever I first joined Project Reclass, we were actually just using plain old JavaScript. And one of the things that I've noticed in my time as a developer is that JavaScript can introduce a lot of different bugs that are hard to find, hard to track down, and that may not even show up till much later in the application, even after it's deployed. So one of the decisions that we made to kind of solve that issue was to move to TypeScript, because TypeScript has a very robust typing system. You can also make it more or less restrictive. It's fairly easy to onboard somebody who has a JavaScript background into TypeScript because it has a very similar syntax. And it's also just a buddy to help you as you're coding the feature. Next slide.
Stephen, would you like to tell us how we picked the backend framework that we did?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen. I'm a developer here with Project Reclass. Over the summer, I built the API for the ToyNet piece, and I prepared just a small slideshow to talk about Django and why we chose to go with that. Just bear with me 1 second.
Oh, you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, I'll actually share my screen.
It's all yours.
Okay, can you guys see? Okay. You guys see this? Good?
Yep.
Okay, so Django framework. So we chose Django for a lot of the benefits as well as other things. It's a full stack framework, extensive list of libraries and modules that you can use right out of the box, requires less decision making, no reinventing the wheel. A lot of it is done for you, which is really good. Better suited for large scale applications like what we're building here, with larger teams that are expected to have much longer lifetimes and other things. So that's why we didn't go with some ones that are smaller. Companies that already use Django and Flask are Instagram, Coursera, Pinterest, Udemy. The other one where the other framework that we were considering using, but it's smaller, so we didn't, is Flask. It's really more of a micro framework. We're going to get more into that in a bit. Companies that use something like Flask is Netflix, Lyft, Reddit, Bank Salad. Databases that are supported by Django, a whole bunch of Postgres, SQL, MariaDB, MySQL, Oracle, SQLite, list goes on. Why do we choose Django and not Flask? Flask is what's known as a micro framework, as I was just talking about, which was designed to be a lightweight framework for simple static web applications. Oh, sorry, let me go back. Simple static web applications specifically geared towards people who are new to Python code because it's so lightweight in its design and really meant for projects that don't have a very long lifespan. It's better to use Django because it's better suited to handle large scale, like I was saying, fully featured applications with extensive collection of libraries and modules. A lot of it just comes together. It's very easy to use. It's like they use your code, like they call your code as opposed to like, you call their code. It's very easy, very convenient to use. And it doesn't take long to understand. Django admin page. This is a really cool feature of Django backends and Django overall, is that they have a specific admin page that you get right out of the box that you can use. And all you have to do is just like log in, and you can delete and edit things like visually. It's basically like a GUI. So that's pretty cool that we use that. One of the most powerful parts of Django, like I was saying, is automatic admin interface. It reads metadata from your modules to provide quick model-centric interface where trusted users can manage content on your site. The admin recommended use is limited to an organization's internal management team. It's not intended for builders to your front end, for building your entire front end around. Now, using something like Django, you have to basically create something called a virtual environment where it isolates all your project's dependencies from any other project's dependencies, which is really cool because you don't want to get those things mixed up. So that's something that I used, and I'm continuing to use as we develop this project. They're all separated into their own environments like this. Lastly, because I built out this just the back end, not as well as the front end. In Django, it's pretty much it's as a framework, it does both, but we're only using Django to do the back end. I use something called the Django REST framework, which is basically it's like a lightweight framework that sits on top of Django and makes it it makes it very familiar to something like Express, if you've ever used that with Node. And it makes it very simple if you're just trying to create a backend. So Django REST framework is a powerful and flexible. Let me just move this here 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Now, Django REST framework is a powerful and flexible toolkit for building web APIs. Django is a framework that is used for the back end part, while the Django REST is used to render the database file in JSON or XML so that front end can understand. Although Django itself can do this, Django REST has many more features also. So yeah, so bottom line is using this REST framework, it makes using Django for backend a lot easier. I'm a lot more familiar with things like Express. If you come from frameworks like Node on backend, with JavaScript, it's really easy, really cool to use. And we're ultimately using Django because it's better for larger scale projects that are going to last longer, like we intend to. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Let me share my screen again, and you can all let me know. Nod if you can see my preso. Excellent. Okay, so now we turn it to Scott to talk about some of our open source goals.
Yeah, definitely. So ToyNet is actually open source as it is. You can go onto GitHub and you can look at our organization project Reclass, and all of our source code is there and it is open sourced. But one of the objectives that we have for the future is to start creating public GitHub issues so that people who are not necessarily a part of Project Reclass can still help and contribute to ToyNet. This also includes legends, or people who maybe were part of Project Reclass or left because of time issues or anything like that. It gives them an opportunity to continue to contribute even after they're not with us. And on that note, we are looking for more TypeScript and JavaScript and React developers, as well as any Python backend developers for Q4. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me, or I believe there's an application somewhere that we can probably pass in the chat. But are there any questions so far? Any questions on maybe why we chose React, maybe why we are using TypeScript, anything like that?
Yeah, I've got some questions.
Yeah.
Although I guess I'm sort of curious about the education side of things, especially because over the summer you guys had a lot of interns. I was wondering sort of how the educational aspect of bringing people up to speed on TypeScript who might have only been familiar with JavaScript went, sort of what the process of that was.
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of talk about this, and Yi could probably also talk about this a little bit because he was one of our interns for this past quarter. Basically, I came in and introduced TypeScript, and one of the things that I've learned is that paired programming can be really instructive and can really help both me learn new things and also the other developers. So that's one of the things that I have definitely done to help teach TypeScript. We had some like tech talks, some smaller tech talks and lightning talks at the beginning to kind of introduce people to TypeScript. But as far as like education, there was no formal really education, more just, hey, get your hands dirty with TypeScript and I'm going to be here to help you learn more about that. Yi, did you kind of want to mention anything about that or how it was for you to learn TypeScript?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like getting your hands dirty is definitely the best way because I had a week to learn about React and TypeScript and all that stuff before jumping right into the project. But then during that time, I was just reading documents and I felt like I knew it, but when I actually stepped into the project, I started hitting walls and roadblocks. And by going over these and completely and solving these issues, I was able to learn a lot faster. And if I had any issues, there's always Scott that I could ask, or I could ask Tay, and they would just help me work towards fixing that issue, which for me was way better than just reading off a document at least.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, C. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does.
Awesome. Great. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I don't want to monopolize anything, so I'm going to wait to hear if anyone else has any questions before I ask any more.
We have plenty of time.
Okay, well, if no one else is going to ask, then I do have one sort of on the back end side as well. So on the front end side, it sounds like you guys are sort of already starting to use some static types with TypeScript. Are there any plans to do the same for Python with maybe MyPy?
I haven't looked into MyPy very deeply yet. I do use the typing module. So it enforces that, hey, this class that I created, this should be the type that I am sending into this function and things like that. It actually turned out to be extremely useful because I have a couple classes that are very similar. So being able to distinguish them and what I'm returning, a lot of my code is just translating into different structures that make sense for a particular use case. But I'd be interested to look more into MyPy. Have you used it before?
Only in passing. I can count probably on one hand the number of hours that I spent using MyPy. It's not very long at all.
Did you like it?
I did. I mean, I think both MyPy and TypeScript are in a very interesting problem space with the problem of gradual typing. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for your question. Are there any other questions about any of the frameworks that we have discussed so far?
I have a question.
Yes.
So for your back end and your front end, do you implement any testing frameworks?
Yeah, so right now we are, I don't believe we have any testing yet. We just haven't gotten to that for the backend. But on the front end, right now we're using Jest to do some unit testing. And I'd actually like to start using or move towards using Cypress as a kind of end-to-end testing for our stuff. But we currently don't have that. We're currently using Jest to unit test our front end. Tay, do you know if we're using anything for the back end?
We are using, what is it, unit test or whatever, the typical unit testing framework for Python. However, I haven't ported that in from my POC. So if you want to go to github.com/my full name, which is very long, /project-reclass, you would be able to see. I actually used it quite a bit while I was developing my algorithm for finding subnets, because you have to deduce the subnets by figuring out which devices are connected to the switch that is connected to the router. So I do a depth first traversal, and I was having a really hard time getting it all working. And if I changed the implementation a little bit, I was having a lot of trouble making sure nothing broke. So I would save the state at the beginning, and then I would also save the expected state at the end once I manipulated the topologies. But in terms of like API endpoint testing and things like that, we haven't gone into it. That's something that we want to make sure we do in Q4. I would say the backend is the least developed part of our system. Steve, I don't know if you had any thoughts on Python testing, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, I haven't done any testing on the back end so far, but I would love to have any help doing that, going forward into Q4 and into Q1. I would love to get that done.
Yeah, if you have any suggestions, Nam, let us know.
Well, I guess this one's for Scott. Is there any particular reason why you decided on Cypress and not other end-to-end frameworks like Puppeteer or Selenium?
Yeah, so it hasn't been really fully decided. Just something that I've in my research I've come across, and it seems to be the easiest to set up and to write the test for. done a little bit of Selenium, and Selenium, there seems to be a lot of like boilerplate and a lot of overhead in starting up the WebDriver. But like I said, we haven't made that full decision yet on whether or not we're going to stick with Cypress or maybe Selenium or Puppeteer, as you mentioned. But so if you have any suggestions on which one you maybe use, then that would be great too. But in my research, I like Cypress the most. And that's why I'm thinking we're leaning towards Cypress for the future.
I guess the recommendation would depend on what the end-to-end testing is used for. Is it used for, testing, or is it is it an automation tool or CI/CD builds?
Right, so it's going to be, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we have a CI pipeline, which basically ensures that all of our code is linted, and so it's properly formatted, but also that all of our tests work together. So Cypress would be included in that CI pipeline to basically test the interactions of multiple components together, and then also in the future test the interaction with the backend. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome.